DroneTalks is an online platform to spread ideas and to educate in the drone ecosystem. At DroneTalks, we discuss technology, regulatory, business and ecosystem topics openly with industry leaders to enable and foster innovation for a better future.
Hi everyone, I am Esther Kovacs, CEO and founder of DroneTalks, and today I am talking with Amit Ganjoo, who is the CEO and founder of ANRA Technologies. Hi Amit.
Hi Esther, good talking to you.
So I should admit to the audience, me and Amit know each other now years, and I know that his background is engineering, and I'm just always wondering about how an engineer comes to the point when he or she decides that, oh, okay, I'm open my company, my own startup, and I will focus on drones and air traffic management and everything involved regarding that industry.
You're right, I'm an engineer, and as long as I remember, I've been fascinated by aviation and everything that was flying. Fast forward a few years, I ended up becoming an engineer, and then I ended up actually starting a company, not in the aviation space, not in the drone space, but in the telecom space where I was working. And along the way, my passion for aviation never faded, and I managed to get my pilot's license and built an experimental aircraft that I used to fly. And then eventually in late 2000s, I was recruited by the US Department of Defense to come and work on some drone and communications program because of my communications background and because of my aviation background. So that's how the whole drone journey started. I started working with defense drones long before the commercial drones were really popular. And then eventually when I transitioned out of Department of Defense, I had some ideas. We filed some patents, got some awards based on some prototypes in DC we got the Coolest Technology Award. That's how it all spurred. I'm like, okay, there's something here. We're trying to solve a problem that really exists. And that's how ANRA Technologies was born in the fall of 2015.
Congratulations, that seems like a really well thought journey. And, if I want to introduce ANRA Technology to anyone, what would I say? What does it mean, airspace management?
Airspace management means a lot of it's one of those terms that has been highly abused because airspace management means different things to different people, just like machine learning and AI. It's one of those buzzwords that if you ask 10 different people, you'll get 10 different interpretations. So from the point of view, the way we look at it, airspace management is ensuring the sanctity of the national airspace system, making sure all aircraft, whether it's manned aircraft or crewed aircraft. In the new terminology, we don't use manned, we use crewed aircraft or uncrewed aircraft. They both need to exist and share the same airspace, whether they're small, whether they're large, whether they're flowing lower altitudes or higher altitudes. And how do you build an ecosystem around it that enables the safety of the whole environment, not just from purely a tracking or monitoring point of view, but all other services that come into play. So airspace management is kind of the glue that holds everything together to enable the safety of our airspace.
That's a perfect definition, Amit. I haven't heard better so far. So thank you for it. And if I want to talk about ANRA Technologies, the audience may know that I used to lead the Global UTM Association. So I had a chance to work with a lot of different UTM, unmanned traffic management providers. So if I want to talk about ANRA Technology, how ANRA Technology is different than the others, and I think it's also worth mentioning that they are one of the leaders in the UK currently with the future flight projects. Just wondering why a government choose ANRA Technologies. So what ANRA knows, what others don't.
How do I answer that question and be politically correct? So I'm trying to think that. So I think the honest answer is we come at this industry from an inside out perspective versus an outside in. Because if you talk to anyone about drones, everyone gets excited and everyone wants to jump into this space and start a drone company. We come at this industry from an inside out. So we are not just passionate about the aviation, the safety aspect. We have lived and grown up in this industry. And we are not just building the technology, we are driving the standards. Like I chair ASTM standards, one of the leading standards organization that's building the interoperability, because at the end of the day, we have to build, you mentioned GUTMA, I'm on the board for GUTMA too. So building the harmonized skies, what we call it, or interoperable systems that can operate globally. So you need technical standards, you need specifications, you need agreement from different stakeholders. You need to work with air navigation service providers and regulators alike, along with industry. So we not only worked on defining those standards, those interfaces, we have actually built the solution, not just vaporware, built actual solution and exercised it operationally. Since our inception in 2015, we were one of the first companies to have a Space Act agreement with NASA to work on collaborative or what NASA back then coined the term UTM. No one knew the term. So we were one of the first companies to have that agreement with NASA to start working on UTM research through the different campaigns, and starting in North America with NASA FA and now globally. And to answer your question, in UK, we've been fortunate to be able to work with different folks in UK, DFT, CAA, and Carable Systems and others since 2018, and doing the crawl, walk, run, where you start building with some concept of operations, then building the interfaces, and then trialing. So we are moving forward along with that. And so far, it's been an amazing experience working with the folks in UK. And we have a dedicated team and office in UK that focuses on those efforts.
We're talking about the UK here, but most of the audience knows that a few weeks ago, the European member state accepted the new use space regulation. So I think Europe now is a really hot topic in the industry. So I'm just wondering, should we create this interoperability in Europe, or how can we do that? What's your thoughts?
It all needs to be interoperable. So, by the way, we are engaged in Europe too. We are working with the AMULET, very large demonstration, along with Cesar and other partners in Spain, Netherlands, as well as in UK for advanced air mobility. But to answer your question specifically, EU requires the harmonized skies, because eventually, not today, eventually you will have to, just like we had to do for manned aviation, you have to allow cross-border operations. Initially, EU countries may choose the best way to implement airspace management specific to their own state, but we need to have agreed upon standardized data exchanges and protocols, and they become very critical pieces to avoid a patchwork of airspace, where you don't want to end up a few years from now, where you have a bunch of these fragmented systems that cannot interoperate. And we have learned, all of us in the aviation industry have learned these lessons from the manned aviation, and the significance of being able to fly internationally is an economic driver. So that's why we need to focus on that right from the get-go, whether it's for small or large uncrewed aircraft and their integration with the manned side.
Talking about small or large aircraft, what about UAM? Do you think, the UTM companies and the UAM initiative has some activities together? Is that needs to work together, or is it totally separated, or how do you see?
No, there are touch points. There are subtle differences in the deployment models and the ConOps for the two, small UAS versus urban air mobility, or what's called advanced air mobility in many cases. But at the end of the day, all these have to coexist in the same airspace. We can start off and say, hey, small UAS will only operate below certain feet and stuff like that. But when you move into this UAM world and the UAM corridors, there will be situations where these UAM aircraft have to transition from higher altitude to lower altitude as they are landing and take approaches and departures, whether it's at a vertiport or at a ground-based location. UTM drones may need to pass through a UAM corridor, or, for example, they may experience an off-nominal event that causes an unplanned entry into a corridor. Likewise, a UAM aircraft may experience an issue or may have to interact with within the airspace where small UAS are operating. And similarly, there may be other crewed aircraft or traditional commercial or general aviation aircraft, or like a medevac helicopter that has to crisscross a UAM corridor or a small UAS. So there's data exchanges that need to be defined for these to be interoperable. And a lot of concepts that have been built up for the UTM over the past many years translate one-on-one towards the UAM airspace management as well. I think at this point, it's probably not best to get into the details, but there are the basic building blocks are already there, and then you add the specific use cases that handle the UAM specific deployment models. And these are add-ons, not ORs. These are add-ons that bolt on top of the UTM, and you refine those concepts, if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. And, we're talking about UAS, UAM here, and I am really convinced they are just around the corner. And they will be implemented earlier than people think, to our everyday life, solving problems. But I am convinced because I'm working in the industry, and I'm sure you're convinced as well. But what about others? So when you talk about, airspace management or drones or UAM to any of your friends or colleagues outside of our industry, what's the view or what's the view regarding social acceptance? What do you think? And what can we do as an industry to boost social acceptance?
That's $1 million question right there, Esther. So that's the big challenge, because we can solve all the technical challenges, we can solve all the regulatory challenges, but eventually all these use cases rely on public acceptance, rely on end customers, because if at the end of the day there are no customers, it becomes a nice big science experiment. That's what it becomes. So in terms of acceptance, I think you have to decouple small US acceptance versus the bigger urban air mobility acceptance, because the problem statements you're trying to solve are different. So the levels of acceptance might be different. So in terms of small US, doing simple line of sight operations, we see a good amount of acceptance there. But when we are talking about BVLOS operations, especially in dense urban areas where you're going to be flying over houses, over residential area, or over people, that's where a lot of this public acceptance comes into play. But however, what we have seen is if you tie it into a specific need where, for example, COVID has impacted most of the industries, including aviation, but it has also highlighted the need for innovative solutions, such as if you cannot go out and doing deliveries, like for perishable items and stuff like that, or medical deliveries. Like we foresee medical deliveries happening a lot before I'll get burritos delivered to my doorstep, right? But we see medical because you're actually solving a need. So use cases like that, or use cases like linear inspection for infrastructure and stuff, it increases the safety factor, it decreases the cost, and it doesn't have the novelty, because there's that novelty factor where the business case might not align right away. It will be there eventually. So you have to look at this again in a crawl, walk, run. So we feel there are certain use cases that will get public acceptance sooner than others. And we see it happening a lot more for small US. And then as we transition, to your point, towards urban air mobility, Jetsons, everyone gets fascinated by Jetsons and flying cars and stuff like that. And that will happen in our lifetimes, Esther. But what will probably happen long before that is unmanned cargo delivery, where there's no human on board, because the safety threshold, and rightfully so, aviation has highest safety standards it's different when you're driving on the road and something happens, you pull over to the side of the road. But if you're in the sky, that doesn't work that way. If something happens, you can't pull over to the side of the road. So I'm not sure if I quite answered your question. So the public acceptance for UAM is probably going to take a little more effort, because the noise threshold and seeing something small versus something large flying overhead has a different perception.
I totally agree, Amit. Totally agree. And I think also COVID helped a lot to enable drone services, because people started to understand the benefit and experience it. So thank you so much for the interview. I think it was really insightful, Amit.
Thank you, Esther. It's a pleasure talking to you as always.
Brought to you by DroneTalks Online, a platform designed to spread ideas and educate in the drone ecosystem. Search for DroneTalks.online to hear from more of our industry leaders and to find out how you can get involved.